Yeah? Okay. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the Pacific Northwest Tableau user group. And I am Ryan Callahan. I work for InterWorks as an analytics consultant. I'm also one of the leaders of the Portland Tableau user group. And I am joined by all of the other leaders of the TUGs in the Pacific Northwest, which would include Seattle and Bellingham and Portland. And this is kind of a new thing we've been doing since basically since COVID happened, and we haven't been able to meet in person. So we there was a sort of consortium or a super group of us TUG leaders got together and decided to figure out a better way to provide content and distribute, the things that we have widely. There's a lot of people from Seattle on this call, and us from Portland don't typically engage with people from Seattle from a TUG perspective. So this is really great that we have so many people here. I wanted to give all the other TUG leaders a chance to just say hi quickly before we get started. But if we wanted to, Isabel from Seattle, if you want to say hi.
Yeah, hey everybody. We're really excited to be partnering, like Ryan said, with the other leaders in the PNW, and I'm happy to have a good representation of Seattle on the call. So thanks for taking the lead on this one, Ryan.
Do we have anyone from Bellingham? No.
I think okay. Melissa's on the call from Bellingham. And as a reminder, I think all of our groups meet monthly, I think. And again, we're coordinating as the Pacific Northwest right now. So I think, we're still on a monthly track, and it's always a good idea to sign up on our community pages or our social media. We're always trying to keep those updated as to our next events. So we know we've had some problems with the email listservs. So social media and our community page are definitely good ones to check on.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Melissa up in Bellingham, and just wanted to say hi to everyone. If anyone is here from Bellingham, Washington, hope you got the email blast from me, and if not, I'm still kind of working on getting that out for our splash page. You can always contact me at melissa@wcog.org, and I'm happy to add you to our list. But we are a small but mighty group, and love to have you guys participate whenever we can. And so we're enthusiastic Tableau folks up here, and hope you can participate whenever you're available. And thanks to everyone who has been involved in organizing this from Seattle and Portland and the other groups. So thank you guys for letting us tag along.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, other TUG leaders. Before we get on with our regular scheduled content, I think we all wanted to just sort of address the elephant in the room, and these are sort of extraordinary times right now. I think for myself and in talking to other people, it's been hard to find your voice or figure out even what to do or show support. And I wanted to, make sure it's known that everybody in this call has a special power. They have something that they can do that a lot of other people in the country can't. You know how to, analyze data, you know how to visualize data, you know how to storytell with data. And those are really important things in this type of environment. So I know it's easy to get caught up in the, sort of imposter syndrome of the things I don't really make an impact, or the things I share aren't great or aren't good, but that's just simply not true. So if you want to make your voice heard or amplify the voice of those that you don't think are heard well enough, you have the power to do that. And I think that we have the tools to make that, that possible. You don't even need a Tableau license to publish something up to Tableau Public, in which from there you can share that widely. And, I think if you were trying to make your voice heard on something and wanted to share that more broadly, I think, people in the community would help you out. People on this call would help you out. I know I would. So that's kind of all I want to say about that, especially because just our communities in particular, I think are pretty impacted here. Seattle and Portland are both in the national news every day at this point. So I don't know if any other TUG leaders wanted to follow up with anything else. I think they're all in support there though.
Yeah, you know, we definitely want to just echo what Ryan was saying. We know that we have a lot of people in our communities right now. We can't speak for our whole groups. We don't try to, but we know that we have a lot of community members that are struggling right now, that are hurting. We see you, we care about you. We know that it's, you know, sometimes hard to focus on work when there are a lot of personal and social unrest going on. And, you know, I personally believe these movements are really important, that people are seen and heard, and that we can use, you know, our skills as data people to highlight social injustice and systemic issues by looking at the data behind them. And by being good data stewards of, you know, we've talked a lot about data storytelling and avoiding data pitfalls and doing some of those things. So we care about you all. We know this is hard. And so, yeah, thanks. Just wanted to take a moment to appreciate that and acknowledge that we know a lot of people in our communities are affected right now. So.
Well said, Isabel. Thank you. All right, so the regular scheduled content, we're doing this sort of spotlight, and the purpose of the spotlight is to, this was born out of the fact that once COVID hit, we really couldn't have in-person meetings anymore, and so there's a lot lost there. And you know, the reason that I started going to TUGs in the first place was to meet people, get to know them. So we're trying to make something like that happen, and you know, what we're doing here is sort of shedding the spotlight on some of the community. It's an opportunity for them to talk about themselves, what they do, you know, maybe even their experience with Tableau. You can be like a total Tableau beginner, or you can be a Jedi, or anything in between. We just want to learn more about you. And so our first spotlight member is someone who just happened to be the first volunteer for this. He's also just happens to be one of the other leaders of the PDX TUG, one of the newer leaders. He's someone that has been pretty active, or at least showed up, had pretty high attendance at our TUGs, and now he's one of the leaders. So this is a great opportunity for him to, for us all to get to know him. And that's Jonathan Pape, and he's out here in Portland, obviously. So Jonathan, if you wanted to take it away from here.
Yeah, no
I'll stop
problem.
my share.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just jump right into it. About me, I wanted to share, because I'm an entry level, and through the TUGs I've met a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds. And a lot of times we have a sort of a mental image about what a data person is, or a Tableau user should be, or sort of their background and where they went, what they studied in college, and what they do for a living now. And when I talk to people at TUGs, I discovered that my background is really different than a lot of people there. It was actually hard to find people with a similar background. So this is basically like what you could find in my LinkedIn. It's like I'm a senior marketing manager at First Tech. I've moved to Beaverton in 2012. I'm originally from Michigan. I've got a Bachelor of Applied Science in e-commerce. This was before even web development was a thing. And then an MBA from Western Michigan University, and I'm gonna actually go back to college probably this fall. I love going to school. I love learning new things. So I thought that'd be a lot of fun. So sort of my data background is I grew up and I went to school for web development. Sorry. I went to school for web development, and I actually learned web development on Dreamweaver, when Dreamweaver is considered a IDE. Now they're using like Atom and Vim and a lot of different text editors, and it's all console. It was before Ruby, and we usually use templates. And so from there, I started working for a startup that Expedia acquired in Michigan. I started learning analytics, web analytics there, and I learned a little bit about marketing, and then I transitioned into a marketing role, doing digital marketing, primarily paid search in website analytics. A lot of times we had to do our own analytics of small and medium-sized businesses. I moved from there to being like an agency, so working with a variety of clients and working at Yahoo for a while I basically was a creative strategist for all of Canada. So I'd work with their large clients and anyone who's large enough to have an agency in Canada or who is based in Canada, I worked with. And so I'd analyze theirs. I do a lot of benchmarking, competitive research, and generate reports off that. Or Yahoo actually had tools that they created. And now at First Tech, for data primarily, it's a lot of like funnel optimization. It's a financial institution, so we look at what they do on the ad platform, what they do on the website, how they will go through the application process, how they submit applications, and then if it's funded. And we try to analyze all those and look for friction points so that we can optimize. So that's my takeaway. Like I don't have a math background. I don't have a data background. I only recently started using Tableau. I found that my Java sort of experience aligned a lot with Tableau. The logic is really similar. The schema is just a little different. So it made a lot of sense, and I really enjoy using it. And I really like visualization, data visualization. So what I like about data visualization, and I had a hard time finding good images, so I actually found a really horrible graphic in data visualization to throw up there. It was floating around Reddit like yesterday or 2 days ago, and I thought it was amazing. You'll notice they inverted the vertical axis to make it look like the stand your ground law, like cause gun deaths to go down. But it's this sort of storytelling and this sort of like visual things that you can convey with data that I really like about it. It seems like historically, like finance vertical has done a really good job telling a company story just with a couple KPIs. Journalism, really, they've stepped up recently in using data and taking it across like a variety of different sources. And I really think it's fascinating what they're doing. From an SEO perspective, the 10x content, I put some links down there. We'll probably share these decks. It's just making content that's 10 times better than what's out there. So if you take a subject, how do you make it a lot better? And a lot of times it's going in depth and using data to sort of tell that story. And one of the things I saw recently is just using data simulation with COVID. So like how are linear regression and these regression models, what's the simulation, what is the data telling us that might happen, and how that applies to the way we're looking today. And that sort of applies to machine learning, what's really popular right now. With linear regression, what sort of insights, what sort of modeling can we build, how can we convey this data to storytellers. I mean, a lot of the tools that are out there like Plotly in Python or Seaborn aren't that compelling. So tools like Tableau that can sort of bridge that gap. And I know there's like Python, I think it's PyTableau, that you can connect Python to Tableau and sort of tell that story and move that data dynamically right into these dashboards. Is really the future in my opinion, and I think it'll be really cool. Growth, these are things I've learned. I know like we did the doctor's session and there's some entry-level stuff, so I thought like, hey, there's other entry-level people like me, and maybe if I put this out there and convey how I feel, then they won't feel bad asking these questions in future. So one of the first things is like not to aggregate aggregated data. I mean, to data people, it probably seems very common sense. In Tableau, if you bring in data, it won't let you do it dynamically, but I still people like bringing in like click-through rate or conversion rate or cost per click, which is an aggregation that ad platforms provide, then trying to aggregate it. So that sort of knowledge. I advise looking at really popular dashboards and incorporating your favorite parts. A lot of my Tableau dashboards come right from Google. This is a Google Data Studio. I really like the design. I pull bits of that into my dashboards. A lot of my dashboards look like Google Analytics or Google AdWords because those are the platforms I'm most familiar with. I mean, Reddit's got Data is Beautiful, which is really updated. Tableau's got their Tableau Public, what is it, Bit of the Day that they published that has really good examples, and looking at those things and sort of getting inspired by them. Also looking for inspiration from for formulas and organizations from other sources. So I put in there a link to like one of my favorite Tableau template resources, Python programs like Streamlit. That's sort of it's a quick way to make data visualization applications using Python. Seaborn's one of their newer visualization tools that does really cool stuff. And then graphic design. I think this is sort of underrated, but if you've played around with Photoshop and you're familiar with the layers, it's really easy to take that sort of layered Photoshop approach and now apply it to Tableau with the transparent background. So you can build really cool backgrounds or use like a vintage TV or a vintage dashboard and just put your data on top of it and have like a really compelling experience with that. Then basic things like, I notice this when I work with associates, consistent fonts, consistent font sizes and colors. I thought of that because I was going through and PowerPoint was changing all my font sizes as I was typing new things in. And then focusing on the KPIs and not a lot of data. I see a lot of dashboards that are just like 20 different charts or 20 different graphics, and they don't really tell the story because there's too much there. So you don't have to make a lot of data. You can just focus on the ones that tell the story. And I put my favorite ones there. I mean, for paid search, we have like impressions, clicks, click-through rate, conversion rate, cost per conversion, cost, and really the ones that are really important is like one to measure effectiveness, one to measure the budget, and one to measure year-over-year growth. And if you can distill all your ideas and everything you're looking at down to those key ideas, then you don't have to build out like a mammoth dashboard that's slow to update, that when you put it in front of people, you sort of got to explain why these things are important. And then finally, along those same lines, creating dashboards for specific audiences. C-suites need different dashboards than a marketing manager. One might want to see sort of a barometer or like what's hot, what's not, and the other one might want to see in the weeds, detailed metrics. So finally, I just provided some of my favorite books about data and storytelling. Made to Stick is a great book about how to tell stories and sort of things to look for. The Lean Startup, it's not really about analytics or data visualization, but they got a really interesting chapter in there about actionable metrics and vanity metrics. Like what can you provide that actually is compelling and leads to good decisions in the future, and what doesn't. And finally, web analytics demystified. I think the speaker for this actually spoke at one of the recent Seattle TUGs or the Bellevue TUG. But if you're like doing email marketing or display marketing or search marketing, sort of some of the KPIs that you can look at that are distilled down and top level, so you're not trying to reinvent the wheel with that. And I think that's all I had. I'm not sure if that was 10 minutes, but is there any questions or? Oh, cool. We'll share this deck and let me know if you have any questions, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to follow up. So thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Hey, everyone. This is Debbie from the Portland Tableau user group. Again, thanks, Jonathan, for that awesome presentation. It's always really great to hear people's journeys of how they got to Tableau. And there's so many people in the community who started out not doing anything data related and then just sort of converged with it. As a couple quick things before we go on to our next presenter, if you have any questions, feel free to message the Q&A function or the chat. So I will be monitoring both. If you have anything, or if there's anything that we need to follow up with, Jonathan mentioned that the slides will be posted, so we'll make sure to share that. And if you didn't already notice, this meeting is also being recorded. So if you want to share it with anyone, we will make sure to post that link and make it available. Next, I'm just super excited to introduce our next presenter, our colleague, Keith Dykstra. Keith works with Ryan and myself at InterWorks. He's actually located in Washington, DC. And I'm excited that Keith was able to join us for our Pacific Northwest TUG meeting, because he is super passionate and talented at data visualization. We frequently, I guess speaking for myself, I love to look at Keith's work for inspiration, and he leads our East Coast analytics team as well. Keith, I'll pass it off to you to share your wisdom and knowledge in Tableau.
Cool. Thanks. I'm just going to pull up my PowerPoint and get started for you guys. Debbie was really kind and maybe exaggerated a little bit. I will just give a quick disclaimer and say probably 98% of what I do in Tableau is stolen from other people in the community. It's one of the things I love about the Tableau community is that they share so much stuff. So a lot of the stuff that I do is really just me sort of taking other ideas and repurposing them. And today I'm going to focus a little bit on some things I've been doing recently to try to improve the user experience in my Tableau dashboards. But we'll get the boring stuff out of the way with first. Just wanted to give a little background on me. As Debbie mentioned, I work on our East Coast analytics team with InterWorks, helping companies understand their data. Before becoming an analytics consultant, I actually taught middle school math. So you can see a picture of me with some of my former students in the middle there. I taught for several years for KIPP-DC, and then I transitioned to my school district's analytics team, which is where I learned Tableau. So was primarily using Tableau in the context of education data. I also serve on the board of Biz for Social Good. So we're a small group of volunteers that just helps small nonprofits find the story in their data. And it's a great cause if you ever want to get involved. We post occasionally throughout the year data sets that you can look through and help nonprofits discover what their data actually says about the work that they're doing. Outside of data, you're likely to find me in the kitchen. I do a lot of cooking. And you might notice that I'm kind of awkwardly hunched over in that picture in the bottom because fun fact about me, I am 6 feet 7 inches tall, which means that most photos of me generally turn out looking like this. So it's a picture of me at my brother's wedding, and of course my head got chopped off. So all of us interact with data on a daily basis, and even if we're not working with Tableau, we have phones that have apps that tell us how much money we've spent or how many steps we've taken. And generally those apps come with these really sleek user experiences that have motion and animations and interesting icons and rounded corners and things that seem hard or maybe impossible to do in Tableau. And then when we go to Tableau, often the user experience feels a little bit more like this, which, this is just a standard Tableau dashboard. And it doesn't quite feel as sleek or as updated as the last experience that I showed you. And while it's maybe not possible to do exactly this in Tableau, I've discovered that there are some ways that we can get a little bit closer. And I've recently created some things that look like this, or a dashboard that looks like this. And today I'm going to spend a little time just walking you through some of the ways that I use parameter actions to create these interactions that feel a little bit more in line with the modern experiences we have in apps and websites. But before I get into the details, I just wanted to say a brief thing about what do I mean when we talk about UI and UX. I feel like this is sort of a buzzword that gets tossed around frequently, and it's often hyphenated, which just sort of blurs the lines between like, what is the difference between UI and UX? So just to be really clear up front, I found this graphic to be pretty helpful. And on the left side, it distinguishes UX or user experience design, which typically focuses on how is it that people need to interact with information? How do we arrange that information or architect that in a way that's going to be logical for people to step through and interact with? On the contrast, or on the right side, we have UI or user interaction design. I just blanked on the name of it. But user interaction design focuses more on those visual elements of colors and layouts and typography. So if you were thinking about this maybe through the lens of architecture, UX is like drawing the blueprint for a house. How many bedrooms do you need? Is it an open concept house or a more traditional concept with closed rooms? UI is more like interior design. So once that structure is in place, how are we going to paint the walls? What sort of textures and colors do we want inside the room? So structure versus more just visual appeal. I'm going to talk about some ways that I'm using parameter actions that are a little bit more advanced. So before I do that, I just want to give you two very quick 1-minute UX UI tips. I think these are things that can have a really big impact in your dashboards without a lot of effort. I'm going to talk about two things here. The first thing is the use of font hierarchy. And the second thing is one of Gestalt's principles. If you've taken Tableau's visual analytics course, you'll be familiar with some of these things, but his principle or law of common regions. But first up, font hierarchy. So as many of you are probably noticing right now, we don't always read from top to bottom. We tend to focus on things, the largest text first. So our eyes are drawn to things that have a bigger font size. And we can use that to our advantage when we're creating our Tableau dashboards. If I just show you this same newspaper article presented 4 different ways, my eye immediately gravitates towards the one on the left-hand or the right-hand side. There's large text that my eye immediately keys in on, and I can tell that this is an article about the moon. Whereas the article on the far left, where all the text is the same size, I kind of have this experience of looking through and scanning through that article, but my eyes don't really grab onto anything. I don't gravitate towards any of the text, and I don't really get a sense of what that article is about. So simply using font size can help orient people to your Tableau dashboards very quickly and give them a sense of what the dashboard is before they dive into those details. The second principle is the law of common regions. And Gestalt was a researcher that did research on the psychology of how we interpret information visually. He had another principle, which is this law of similarity, which states that when we see things that are similar, we tend to associate them together. So we might group all of the circles together and the squares as a separate group, or even go so far as to see all of the circles as one thing and all the squares as another. But Gestalt's law of common regions states that if you just put a simple background behind these things, we can override those natural similarities, and we can cause people to see things that are dissimilar, squares and circles, as part of the same group. Where that can come in handy is if you look at these 2 different examples. On the left side, I see 6 or 7 things that are simultaneously connected and disconnected. And I kind of have a similar experience with that newspaper article where everything was weighted the same. I have a hard time of keying in on anything and finding a place to start. On the right side, just something as simple as putting a border around those pieces of content allows me to see the things that are connected. And it also breaks that dashboard up into sections that feel pretty easy to digest. So those are just 2 quick tips that you can take to make a big impact on your dashboard. I'm going to talk through a couple more advanced things right now. And I'll also just give a quick disclaimer that these tips are meant for kind of intermediate Tableau users. I may cover some things that feel a little bit over your head if you're brand new to Tableau. So feel free just to sort of kick back, relax, and watch these things. I also will follow up with detailed blog articles that walk through step-by-step everything that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to hit the highlights today and hope you can take away some of the main points behind these techniques. But I will also follow up with more detailed instructions if you want to try to implement any of them. So last summer, I was teaching Tableau's advanced course, and it involves a dashboarding exercise that incorporates sheet swapping. And it's a great technique if you've never used it, just to offer users a little bit of just some options for how they would like to look at their data. So you're seeing the display switch between a bar chart and a map and a scatter plot as well. The way that we typically set that up is by displaying a parameter. But last summer in version 2019.2, Tableau released parameter actions. And I was just playing around with it and thought there might be a way to use that to make this dashboard feel a little bit more modern. And so I played around a little bit and ended up creating this dashboard right here. It's really the exact same thing as you saw in the last screen. Same thing, displays of a scatter plot and a bar chart and a map. But the way that you interact with that is rather than choosing something from a drop-down menu, I put these icons off to the left-hand side that immediately give you a sense of the options you have for how to view the data. And as you make your different selections, there is a blue color that shows up to indicate what your active selection is, and your other 2 options stay in black to show you that those are other options you can choose as well. So I'm going to walk you through the steps required to set this up. It's really just 2 key elements, and this will be the same for the next 2 examples that I show you as well. You need a parameter, and then you need some sort of field that interacts with that parameter. They're going to talk to each other. And so on the left-hand side, I just have a simple string parameter that has 3 values for my different data displays: scatter plot, global map, and bar chart. On the right side, I have a field with matching values. And so again, you see those values repeated: scatter plot, global map, and bar chart. Once I have those 2 core elements, Oh, and by the way, if you've usually set up parameters as integers because they function faster, you can definitely do that as well. You could imagine that these values were 1, 2, and 3 instead of strings. I just use strings here so it is really clear what I'm doing, and you don't have to remember was 1 scatter plot or bar chart. So text just to make that really clear. So we've got, once we have that underlying field, chart value, if I put that on my rows shelf and also assign that to my shape icon, I can choose different icons for each of those different chart types. So I have an icon for my scatter plot, my global map, and my bar chart. And then with a simple calculated field that says, if that chart value is equal to my chart type parameter, those two things that I showed you in the first slide, then 1 else 0, I can drop that field on color. And that's what allows me to color my scatter plot icon blue and leave my global map and bar chart icons black. And in the typical way of interacting with a parameter, we would display a drop-down or these radio buttons. And so you're seeing that as you change your selection to different parameter options, it also controls the icon that receives that blue color to indicate that's your active selection. But with parameter actions, we no longer have to display those radio buttons and have people click through it. We have a new way of giving people control over the parameter selection. So if I set up a parameter action, it's just a simple action that's going to run on a select. And what I'm going to do is I am going to target my parameter, my chart type parameter, with the value from my field chart value. And as soon as I set that up, instead of toggling between those radio buttons, I can now click on my different icons. And as you see above it, that click drives the value of that chart to my parameter, which controls my parameter value. And since that parameter value is connected to the field that controls my color, simply clicking can change the color of my icon. To set up this sheet swapping part, you just need a filter. So if you've never done sheet swapping before, this might feel a little unfamiliar, but essentially I can just clone my parameter and create a calculated field that has the same value as that parameter. If I drop that field on my filter shelf and then just filter for custom values, on my scatterplot sheet, I'm saying only display this sheet if the value of the parameter is scatterplot. And then likewise on my bar chart sheet, I would filter only for when the value of the parameter is bar chart. So when we put that all together, we end up with this display where clicking on my different icons affects my parameter, which controls the color of my icons. And it also relates to that filter, which tells Tableau which of the 3 displays to show. So now rather than showing those radio buttons, I can give this more intuitive option for users to select how they'd like to see their data. Here's another example where I took that same basic technique, but I took it a step further. So I was working with a client that had a really large set of bar charts that they needed to show to give a broad overview of whether categories had met or not met their targets. So we wanted to give as much space as possible to that bar chart, but we also had some filters or settings that they needed to change, but they didn't necessarily need to interact with them all the time. So rather than taking up that valuable space, we decided to either show or hide that content based on when users needed to interact with it. So I'll walk you through the steps required for that as well. The same core 2 elements, we need a parameter and we need fields with matching values. And in this particular example, my parameter is very simple, just an integer with values 0 and 1. And then I have 2 calculated fields. One is min 0 and the other is min 1. So I have those fields that match my parameter values. And now I need to tell them how to talk to each other. On this dashboard, the sheets that you see outlined in blue have the field min 0 on detail. The sheet outlined in red has the field min 1 on detail. What you're not currently seeing is that sidebar content that either shows or hides depending on the parameter value. It's actually a set of 4 sheets that are floating on top of my dashboard. And so I'm just going to move those over to the right-hand side so you can see the full dashboard as I show you how the interaction works. But imagine that content is right next to those icons to support what those icons show. If I expose the value of my parameter, you can see that as I hover over my sheet on the left, which has min 1 on detail, it changes my parameter value to 1. And as I move back over to my KPIs or my bar chart, my parameter value changes to 0 because those sheets have the field min0 on them. And as the parameter is equal to 1, it displays my sidebar content that supports what those icons represent and the choices users have. And as soon as they don't need it anymore and they move back to their to the main parts of the dashboard, that content collapses so it's not in the way. The way that I set that up is just through a filter and some parameter actions. So my filter just says, is my parameter equal to 1? And if I filter for trues, what I can effectively do is, as I toggle between the values of 0 and 1 and change that filter from true to false, it determines whether that content shows or not. And I could have, displayed this parameter control and maybe given it some intuitive names like, do you want to show the labels yes or no? But rather than forcing users to click between those two, I can use a parameter action to connect the value of that parameter to where users are hovering. So I'll show you that right here. Here's my parameter action that shows my labels. I run it on a hover. It's connected to those display icons on the left-hand side, and it targets my parameter with the value 1, making that filter true and displaying the content. Then I set up an inverse parameter action. This one also runs on a hover, but it is connected to the main parts of my dashboard, my bar chart and my KPIs. And it targets that same parameter with the value 0, which makes my filter false and hides the supporting content. Just showing it to you in action now. As I interact with the left-hand sidebar, my parameter value changes to 1, showing my content that I've moved over to the right. And as I move back to the dashboard, my parameter value changes to 0, making the filter false and hiding that content. And anytime a user needs to change their selection, I can display that supporting content so they know their options for how to display the data. And as soon as they've made their selection, that content can disappear so they can focus on the bar charts. So if I move my supporting content back to where it belongs, you end up with this as your final product, which is a nice way of just offering users some support for making sure they know the options they have to filter or to arrange their data, but easily hiding it when they are not, when they're focused on the main set of data. 2 quick disclaimers that I'll give you about this. The performance on this was not quite as quick on Tableau Public, and this dashboard is available for download on Tableau Public. But it's just slow enough that if you hover and it doesn't immediately respond, you might think nothing is happening. So I decided not to actually, this wasn't the end solution that we used for the client, but I wanted to offer it as an example of a way that you can use parameter actions. And I'm hoping that somebody smart in this meeting can download my dashboard and figure out a way to improve my technique to make it work a little bit better. Also, this would be a whole lot simpler if show hide containers just responded to a hover, but currently they only run on a click. So if you're interested in using this technique, but don't want to go through all the work of setting up the parameter actions, I've started an idea on Tableau community. It's number 11017. And I'm hoping that Tableau will make an improvement to that show hide container so that you can show and hide it when you hover over it rather than clicking on it. And now for the most ridiculous thing that I've ever done in Tableau, I'm going to walk you through something that I'm going to call animated storytelling. So at InterWorks, we have a tradition at the end of every year of taking Spotify Wrapped data and collecting it from our employees if they're willing to share it, and then putting together some sort of dashboard or story about the music that we listened to in the past year. So my colleague Kendra and I decided this year that we were going to combine parameter actions with Tableau's new Viz animations feature, which just came out in 2020.1. We ended up creating this dashboard that, as you click through it, gradually reveals other parts of the dashboard. So clicking here is connected to a parameter action that gradually reveals the next part of the dashboard, and it allows people to go through this story at their own pace. I'm going to walk you through the components that are required for this. You're starting to get the hang of this, the same things, right? We have a parameter and we have some sort of field that connects to that parameter. In this example, my parameter is just a set of integers 1 through 15 because there were 15 different story points in my dashboard that I wanted to gradually step users through. The field that I have here is a little bit different. It's a technique that I stole from Ken Flurledge, who has a ton of great ideas on his blog about how to use parameter actions, but it's basically a way of incrementing my parameter. So my parameter, which is called counter, this field just takes that counter value and adds 1 to it. What in effect is going on is that as I'm clicking on these different shapes, those shapes have that field counter +1 on detail. So it's taking the parameter value and changing it from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3, and continuing down the dashboard. Every click just changes the value of the parameter to make it 1 number higher. What you need to know is that under the hood, there's also some things happening besides that. So in this example, I just set up an Excel data source that had a number for each of my different 15 story points. I'm just showing 7 of them here, but there's 15 total. And each of those story points is connected to an X and a Y value that determines where it shows up on my dashboard. I wrote a calculated field that said if the story point, so if story 1 or story point 2 or story point 3, if it's greater than my counter value, then null, else show me the X value. And there's a similar field that shows the Y value. So what that does is, as I'm clicking on my different shapes, you'll notice the counter up in the top right corner is changing from 3 to 4 and then to 5. And as that counter changes, the story points move from having null X and Y fields to valid X and Y fields, which essentially just makes them pop onto the dashboard or hide depending on the value of that counter. There's also another trick that I accidentally discovered, which is I had Viz animations turned on and I saw this bar chart change size as I was changing some of my calculations. And I realized that I could use this as a technique to gradually reveal other parts of my dashboard as well. So in the top section of my dashboard, there's actually a couple of images that had to be loaded onto the dashboard. I had no way of hiding them until I realized I could overlay a bar chart that would disappear as you click to gradually reveal the contents underneath it. So this dashboard ends up just being a bunch of parameter actions that run on a click, and they gradually reveal the shapes that you can click on, or they also change the size of a bar chart to swipe it down or swipe it to the left or right to reveal the contents that are behind it. If you check this dashboard out on Tableau Public, you can also enjoy this. We embedded a Spotify player so that you can check out some of the music that we really enjoyed last year at InterWorks. So lest you think that I am going to leave you with the most ridiculous thing I've ever done in Tableau, I do have just a quick lightning round of 10 practical sources of UX, UI design inspiration. There's a lot of things that I could have included here, and there's probably some people in this room who know more about UX and UI than I do. So apologies if you're an expert and I didn't include you in here. I only had room for 10 people, but I'm going to walk you through 3 blogs, 3 people to follow on Tableau Public, 3 people to follow on Twitter, and then 1 bonus thing as well. I found a lot of inspiration from the Muesli blog, so you can find them at medium.muz.li. And they put together a weekly collection of design inspiration as well as interesting UI interactions. Most of this stuff is not created in Tableau, but I find it interesting just to see what people are doing with other platforms and see if there are ways that I can incorporate that work into my Tableau stuff. If you're not familiar with Robert Janicek, and blanket apologies, I'm going to pronounce some people's names wrong in this section because I haven't met them all in person. He's recently started a blog that focuses on modern design in Tableau and UI, UX stuff. He's only got 2 or 3 articles up so far, but he's definitely worth checking out, and I'm sure he's going to be adding more to this soon, so it'll be a great collection of resources for us. If you're not familiar with the Concert Information is Beautiful Awards, I'd recommend checking out their website. There's some people that have done some really amazing things with data visualization. They're both complex but simple. They are elegant solutions, and they just feature some really great ways of telling stories with data. A couple people to follow on Tableau Public, Pradeep Kumar G, and please include the G if you search for him, because I think there's a couple of Pradeep Kumars on Tableau Public. He won a Vizzy at last year's Tableau conference for showing the most growth out of any Tableau developer. I think he's put a lot of really interesting content on his profile lately that's worth taking a look at. I really like the work of Ludovic, whose last name starts with a T and is French, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it. His work ranges from modern business-focused dashboards to things that you see on the right-hand side, which are more creative. I think he was an Iron Viz finalist, so he has some more advanced things that are maybe hard to implement if you're new to Tableau, but also has some things that are pretty approachable for beginners. I'm a big fan of Samo Droll's work. He is a product designer by nature, and I think a lot of the work he's put out on Tableau Public just feels like it belongs in a publication. He has a really great way of arranging content so that it's easy to understand what you're looking at. And if you're familiar with the viz on the right-hand side, his Stadium Popcorn rankings were shown in the Tableau viz gallery at TC19 last year. If you're not familiar with Luke Stanky, he's one to take a look for on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, he's always sharing really great tips. I thought this one was kind of an interesting way to allow users to control the spacing on their tables, and he has lots of other tips like this. Yvette is a very creative person. I think she calls herself an information designer, so she takes a really creative approach to how she presents data. And I thought this was an interesting way of using viz animations to provide some feedback to users as they make a selection. And then we probably all know about Lindsay Poulter. She was an Iron Viz finalist last year. She shares a ton of really great tips that are very useful in a traditional BI sense. She shares things that are very business-minded, and she has a lot of great tips for how to use set actions and parameter actions, both on Twitter and on her blog and on her Tableau Public profile. And then last of all, don't forget that we are surrounded by great user experiences every day with the websites and the apps that we interact with. I find that lots of times if I'm stuck on something in Tableau, I will pull up a website or an app that I use frequently and see if there's anything I can glean from the way that they organize information or make it clear what options I have to interact with it. To close up, I will just say that just because you can do something in Tableau does not mean that you should. Generally, the best solution is the thing that is going to be the simplest and the most intuitive and the easiest for people to understand, which is not necessarily going to be the fanciest thing. I certainly wouldn't recommend that you do animated storytelling in a business dashboard that's going before an executive. But it was appropriate, I think, for the example that I showed you, which is something that I just wanted to be fun and creative and engage people that I was going to put on Tableau Public. So always be thinking about what you're trying to do and whether it is fit for the purpose of what you are trying to accomplish. I really enjoyed presenting this to you. I really wish I could have been there in person to connect with you afterwards and talk face to face. But if you're interested in staying connected, I've just put my Twitter handle up here as well as InterWorks. If you're on Twitter, you can follow us, and I share a lot of tips, both through my personal account as well as the InterWorks account. If you're not on Twitter, check out the InterWorks blog. I have detailed write-ups on all the techniques that I walked you through today on there as well. And we're constantly posting different tips about Tableau and other data tools. And of course, you can check out my Tableau Public profile if you want to download any of these examples and reverse engineer them. I've offered them all for you to be able to download, and I would love it if any of you can come up with some ways to take what you've learned and make something even cooler with it. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith. We actually have a little bit of time. If there are any other questions or comments, one quick question was just like, oh, if I wanted to continue learning about the functionality that Keith presented on, how would I Google? And Keith, I guess I would first offer, a lot of this hinges on parameter actions and the options and flexibility that gives us. So I would suggest that. Keith, I don't know what other sort of suggestions that you might have on top of the resources that you listed.
Yeah, so I mentioned Ken Flerlich, who he and his brother Kevin have both, when parameter actions came out, they put together a number of different use cases. And I've referred to their blog several times. So I would start there because I think they give like a really broad range of options for using parameter actions that can help you figure out how they might connect to the data that you work with. And then obviously, yeah, if you just Google it, you're going to find some other things as well, but check out some resources on Tableau Public. I like to just be able to download people's stuff and then reverse engineer it. So it's a great way to see how people have used the technique.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just quickly dropped the Flerlich blog link in the chat for everyone to grab as well. Any other questions or comments? Oh, actually, there were two questions during the session that real quick that I want to showcase. There was one question on how to get involved in Viz for Social Good. Keith, I dropped the link to the website in the chat. Would you add anything else in terms of how to get involved?
Yeah, we're kind of going through a restructuring process right now where we're just trying to think of how our model will be going forward. So we've been a little bit slow with posting new projects. So you can see some of the old projects that we've had, and we're hoping to come out with some other new projects soon. So if you do go to the website and don't find a way to engage right away, it's just because we're working on that next thing. But approximately once a quarter or maybe every other month, we'll be posting data sets that people can take. And the goal is really just to put together something that helps a nonprofit understand what their data says about the work that they're doing.
Awesome.
I have a quick question, Keith. First of all, I've been a big fan of the work you do. And I really like the idea of kind of taking concepts from the web, which, you know, there's been a couple decades of really fleshing out user experience on the web, and where Tableau, or not Tableau, but dashboards in general can often feel a little bit behind because it's so easy just to spit out like a default looking executive dashboard, right? And so you take some of those principles that you've learned on the web and the good parts and apply them to your work with Tableau dashboards. You made an interesting comment about, you know, sometimes this isn't a good idea in an executive dashboard or in client work. And I'm wondering if you could, I don't know, kind of talk a little bit more about the decision making that might go there. Like maybe you wouldn't want to have the scrolling viz animation thing in a dashboard that you provide to a client, but where's that cutoff, or how do you make that decision?
Yeah, I think it just comes from thinking about the user first and really understanding like what is the forum they're going to receive this in, how do they need to interact with it. So when I was thinking about our Spotify dashboard that we put together, I knew that that was just going to be something I put out on Tableau Public, and people publish things on Tableau Public all the time. And so I wanted to do something that would grab people's attention. And so I figured if I could find something that was interesting, that incorporated motion, it might grab some people's attention when I shared it on Twitter, which is kind of the primary reason that I chose that method, because I knew that it was something that was going to engage people because I didn't have a captive audience. If you're building a dashboard for work, you probably already have a captive audience. So you don't need to do something really flashy and cool to grab people's attention. You need to do something that really is simple and intuitive and easy for people to understand. And that's actually why I ended up not using that technique of the sidebar that expands in my final dashboard, because it was just slow enough that people thought, oh, this might not be working. So it was a fun thing to experiment with, and I learned some things from it. But in the end, I decided this actually isn't the best user experience. When people interacted with it, they weren't sure if it was quite working or not. And so we decided to go with a different solution. So I think it's always really tying it back to the user and what works for them. And if it doesn't work, try to find another way.
Great response. It's easy to get really caught up in something that's really exciting, but we know that at the end of the day, it's not meant for us. It's meant for who we're building it for. So I totally agree.
I did want to comment that, you know, Keith went into some detail about how the parameter action logic works. This is recorded, as Debbie said, so you'll have access to that. And then, and I'm not sure exactly, this will probably get posted on, there's Tableau has a website or a YouTube page where they've been posting all of the tugs and all the recordings. So this will be put there. If you wanted to hear again his walkthrough. And then of course, Keith said that he also has been posting blogs about all of this. So if you want to get into the details, all that's available to you.
Yeah, you'll find detailed articles on our blog. And I think I've tweeted about all of the things as well from the InterWorks account. So if you're interested, if you're on Twitter, just check out our Twitter handle and you can find it there. But if we're able to send a follow-up email, we can also link you directly to those resources.
Awesome.
Any other questions? Well, good timing, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We can give unless there's any last minute commentary, we can give everybody back 4 minutes of their day.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for attending.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. It was fun to join you.